I really just learned from people around me, how to get better as far as using positional training to get better and how to focus your training on very specific areas instead of just kind of going in and learning random things and rolling, playing your A game all the time. So I was taught how to drill and how to spar by a lot of these really top level competitors.
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Amanda Bruse, and she's been described as a breakout star, especially last year with your double win at the Pans, the no-gi Pans, with a gold medal in your weight division and a silver medal, giving up a lot of weight in the open division. So how does it feel to be described as a breakout star? Whenever I hear that, I always imagine somebody going, and I'm just biased here, screw you, I've been working hard at this for years, and you only all just started paying attention to me. But you haven't been doing jiu-jitsu for that long.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird to me. It hasn't really set in, even when I have won, a lot of the big competitions this past year, I've always just been pushing myself in the sport and kind of just competing against myself. And I wasn't even really thinking about it until people started to be like, hey, how's your breakout year feel? So it's kind of just surreal for me. I appreciate everything. Like you've been saying, I haven't really been training for all that long. So I feel like I'm really just getting started.
So you started training how long ago?
A little bit over 6 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a pretty damn fast progression. What do you attribute? I mean, obviously there's talent and there's work ethic and there's other things, but how did you progress that fast?
Well, whenever anyone asks me this, one, I have to say this is just a personality thing. I'm one of those people who will find something and obsess over it. And so once I started training, I was just hooked and I just wanted to be the best as I could. And then I really just put myself in a lot of positions that made it easier to learn. I switched over to Autos when I was a purple belt. I moved all the way across the country basically to come train and got myself in a room full of people who could teach me how to train, how to progress faster, and surrounded myself with people who were already at the goals that I wanted to achieve. And I think that definitely, of course, helped. Yeah.
So obviously training against a larger pool of better people is going to bring anybody's level up or crush them entirely. In your case, it brought you up. But you also said learning how to train as opposed to just learning new techniques. What do you mean by learning how to train?
Yeah. So, when I first started training, I would say I didn't really have an understanding of what needed to be done to get better. I just would go into class, learn something, roll randomly for as long as I could. But Autos has a very systematic way in which they train. They employ a lot of different situational techniques. Their comp class has things like starting from specific situations like, oh, we're going to start this round and you're pretending like you're in the first 3 minutes or 3 seconds of the match and you have to get points right off the pool or things like that. So training in a way that emulated competition more. And then I really just learned from people around me, how to get better as far as using positional training to get better and how to focus your training on very specific areas instead of just kind of going in and learning random things and rolling, playing your A game all the time. So I was taught how to drill and how to spar by a lot of these really top level competitors.
Can you give me an example of something specific that you started doing or incorporating when you made the move to Autos?
Yeah, I had literally probably never done positional training in my life.
Really?
So I think that the fastest progression I've seen in my game is finding my weaknesses and then just doing those positions over and over and over. So even if I'm not in the gym, I have mats at my garage. I'll invite a friend over. I'll be like, I really need to work this position. Let's just do positional for an hour today. And I think those kinds of focusing on those micro transitions and really breaking down each place in your game is a lot more beneficial than just going in and rolling without a game plan, really.
So what were your weaknesses when you showed up? Again, what's a specific example of?
So I came from the gym where I was also the only girl. So I didn't have a top game and I had no passing and I had no pressure because I was never on top or pass. I was just getting smashed in bottom half for the first year and a half, 2 years. But I went to Autos and of course Autos is known for their pressure passing and their passing in general. So I think that really quickly I had to learn how to pass guard just at all and then how to employ Autos pressure and back takes and stuff like that. So that was a huge gap in my game, was just like the overall top game.
And I imagine there must have been more people your size, weight, and gender.
Oh my gosh,
there as well.
Yeah. Honestly, it was really hard to roll with women my own size at first, because it was like, you get this ego, and I think this happens to a lot of women when you're like the only woman in the gym, and you're like, oh, I'm cool and I'm really good. And then you go to a gym that's a bunch of talented females, and you're like, oh my God, people like my own size and gender are beating me up.
Yeah. So then how long did it take to get comfortable in that new environment? I mean, I was watching some of your older competition footage, actually, and your game really has evolved. It does look like you were in a learning process.
Yeah, I had actually never even done like an IBJJF tournament until I was a purple belt at Autos. That was like my first tournament. I hated competing, so I didn't really do it, except for like smaller tournaments. But yeah, when I got to Autos, there was definitely a good like 6-month period where I just felt very like out of place, not from anyone there, but I just felt like a lack of knowledge, because there was just so much knowledge around me. And so kind of learning to train in the intensity they train at and just getting used to that environment did take a good 6 months. And then I think after I started doing those bigger IBJJF tournaments that really scared me, and I got over that a little bit more, I was able to make a lot more progress and actually just like hunker down and learn a lot.
So how much of your training, given that you're focusing on competition, is just with the general population, the large guys, the small guys, the large girls, the smaller girls, and how much of it is focused in on people that you're going to be facing, trying to emulate the people you're going to be facing in your actual division?
Yeah, I think that there's a great balance. For me, I train almost solely with small guys and girls as much as possible. I feel like I don't get as much out of it when I'm rolling with people just way bigger than me, because I can't do what I want to do. They can't do what they want to do. It's kind of just like we have to give each other things. But I do try to keep it a little bit more where I'm rolling with people a lot who I can do things with, and I'm not just getting crushed the entire time. But when it's time to go to comp class, then I'm trying to make sure I'm going with all the top people. So I would say it's probably like 60-40, like 60% roll with people who you can, move with and hit stuff on, and 40% just get smashed and figure out how to not get smashed in those positions.
How do you not get smashed in those positions?
Man, there's some people who it's still a hard time. Like, I mean, we have some amazing women like Louisa Montero. Those things, when I'm in her mount, I'm just like, okay, maybe I'm not going to learn how to get out of this anytime soon. Instead, I'm just going to learn how she's doing this. So it's more like, in those situations, I'll do the best I can, but really I'm learning from their pressure, and I'm learning how they're controlling me that way. And then I try to emulate that in my own training.
And I don't imagine there's that many people much smaller than you. I mean, I'm getting a little bit hung up on this size thing, but it's always interesting to talk to competitors.
I feel like I'm not that small.
Well, you used to compete at featherweight. What do you compete at now?
I'm actually going back to featherweight. Okay. I did a couple tournaments at lightweight, mostly because I was really like ill before a couple tournaments. I had really bad pneumonia and I was in the hospital. And I just didn't feel like the weight cut was something I really wanted to put my body through. But I'm comfortable competing at like lightweight, but more often I compete at featherweight. So yeah, I am in the lower weight classes. I am small. In my head, I'm giant. That's why I'm always like, I'll go do open class. Like, I'm big, like I'm strong.
So what's your approach when you go into an open? I mean, you did amazingly well last year in the open at Pan Am's. Mm-hmm. So what was your approach there? How many? I don't know how many matches you had in that division. I imagine it was more than a few.
I think I had 3 or 4, and then I lost in the finals. Honestly, I don't change my game that much. I find that when I go in and I try to really, really change my game, it kind of backfires. Of course, there's a couple things that I'll change. Like if I'm going with a girl who's really, really big and I feel like the wrestling's just not going to be there, I'm not going to be able to finish that kind of stuff, I'll be like, okay, I'm more prone to sit and play guard and maybe attack the legs, because the legs are something that I think work on all sizes. Like everyone's leg is going to break in a heel hook, no matter how big. I think it's easier to go for those kinds of things on bigger people. And then, so yeah, I'll do a little bit of game planning, but pretty much I'm just going to go for what I usually go for. But the legs is something that I will kind of tend to go for more if there is a huge size discrepancy.
Yeah, the cruciate ligaments aren't that much bigger than yours.
Yeah, and I think actually in that at Pans, I definitely ended one of the matches with a leg lock, and then I think the other was a choke. But I definitely was trying to go for the legs a lot in the open class.
Yeah, it's funny. In the last couple of years, we've really seen the merging of people who are really good at upper body attacks, and darces and what have you, and lower body attacks. And I think you're an example of that fusion where, I don't know about being agnostic about going for the upper body versus lower body, but you do seem to just take whatever you're given. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that is
other
actually
than the
very
really
fair.
big people.
No, that's super fair. I love attacking the upper body. When I was a white belt, I only did arm bars actually. And then I love going for chokes. I love anaconda chokes, darces, guillotines, all that stuff. But I also love the legs. I think it's better to just, I don't know, I just like going for what's there instead of trying to force things. I try not to be too one-dimensional. I try to keep it exciting. I try to hunt for the submission. So I usually am just going for what I see is there.
How long are your arms relative to other people your size? Yeah.
Not very long, to be honest. They're really not long. They're actually a little bit stocky. Like, I'm kind of stocky, so I don't have a length advantage for sure.
That's a little bit, I mean, often you see, like the Rotolo brothers, the archetypal Darce and Anaconda physique is somewhat longer, while at the same time pretty muscular in the upper body. So
for
what's your
sure.
secret? How do you make those work?
I think it's kind of like how, people with short legs, locking up a triangle is really hard. But once it's locked up, it's really tight. So I think that the main thing for me with like anaconda chokes and things like that is I'm just not setting them up the same as someone with really long arms would set them up. The Rutolos will, dive for darces off of knee cuts and things that are from very far away. And I'm usually hitting it from a tighter position, like a front headlock or something like that, where I'm able to take my time and kind of feed in the grip fully before I roll or anything like that. So I think it's more of a setup thing, but I think the finish is pretty similar regardless. I don't think my arms aren't so short that it's like impossible for me to lock up. And also, my weight class, the girls aren't typically that big, so it's not that hard for me to get my arms around. Yeah,
you're not meeting Gabby Garcia quite yet.
Yeah, then I might have to do like a high elbow guillotine or something. Maybe then no anaconda chokes.
I had a theory, and it proved out to be quite wrong, that all women doing jiu-jitsu would eventually gravitate towards a triangle choke. And then I met a bunch of women who never went there. But let's see, my old theory, the one that I've discarded as I got more data in, was that, did you ever go through a triangle choke phase?
Honestly, not really, but I did go through a teepee choke phase. Like, I would set up which is still a phase, because for me, actually locking up triangles is pretty hard. My legs are pretty short. So I usually will get the triangle, but then I'll just straight up go TP like every time instead of try to finish the triangle. So I didn't really have a triangle choke phase. I had a lazy triangle choke phase.
That's funny. I've never met a TP specialist. I've met people who've done them, but...
It's amazing. It's like one of the most underrated chokes in my opinion. It works on everyone. Like, it's amazing.
Next, you'll become a neck scissorer. Somebody who's watched too many catch wrestling instructionals. I
actually do like that. I do like that because I like the crucifix, and it's always there when you're in the crucifix. So I've played with it a little bit, but I always feel really rude doing that those kind of like scissor chokes.
I can't think of. I mean, I've been caught in them. I've used them, but I can't think of any high level finishes with just a leg scissors choke. I mean, I'm sure as soon as I say that, somebody will say, "Well, what about this?" But can you think of any? I can't.
I don't think I've ever seen it happen in a competition, to be honest.
Well, you'll have to become a queen of the cheesy attacks and start adding wrist locks to your game.
Okay, yeah, I should do that. I should do wrist locks more. I just do some of the classic ones, but it's not my main thing.
So to make this rather amazing amount of progress, I mean, you talked about how you were kind of monomaniacal, and as a fellow German, I'm going to make fun of you for that. I mean, that's the classic square-headed trait. Well, how many times a day were you training? That couldn't have just been training.
There was
3
definitely
classes
a
a week.
period. No, there was definitely a period where I was doing 2-a-days like every day. I would say now I definitely get one session in every day and maybe like a drill session. So 1 to 2 times a day. I think I used to focus too much on the sparring, and I think the more important thing is just adding more drill sessions. So maybe my sparring stayed about the same or even less, but I consistently added more drill sessions over the years to where more of my training is actually like positional and drilling and less of it is just free sparring. So I think that ratio definitely helped me make the progress.
So people mean so many very different things when they use the word drilling. What do you mean by the word drilling in this context?
Yeah, so
Positional
is a form of drilling for me. I don't tend to do like just static drilling where I'm doing a move with no resistance over and over. If I'm drilling, it's probably going to be with at least some resistance and reaction so that I can practice all the different, variations and really actually feel how the move is going to go. And then the other part would be positional. I don't really just do, like static drilling. I'll do it if I'm just learning a move, but I find that I make a lot more progress when I'm actually practicing like live reactions anyways.
Yeah. And I suppose at your level, you don't need to practice a move that many times to get it grooved into your neurology.
Yeah, I would say, what I'll do is usually if I learn a new move, I will write a bunch of notes on it. And so that when I reference the notes, the image of me learning it usually comes back to my mind. And I'm like, okay, I remember how to do this.
So what might your notes say?
Well, I'm pretty organized with my notes. So like I have an app and I have my notes broken down into different positions. So like I'll have wrestling notes, I'll have, close guard, half guard, et cetera. And then I'll have like a questions notes. So techniques I'll write down and I'll just write down the main key points like, okay, use your left hand to pin the wrist here when they do this, then shift to this. And then here's plan A, B, and C. So I'll write down notes like that. And usually those are enough trigger like cues for me to remember the entire move. But I do also devote a decent amount of time to studying like different footage. And so those would also be like separate notes.
Yeah, I think, for me anyway, the act of making notes is the important thing. It's not so much necessarily reviewing them, although that's handy. 80% of the learning happens in the actual making of the note. It's just trying to find a way to describe in written form what you're doing physically and what you might have learned visually, sort of cycling it through the computer one more time, make sure that it gets locked in there. You're the person studying psychology. You can tell me that that's completely wrong according to...
I think the studies have shown basically that like the best way to remember anything really is just like repeated exposure. And we're doing that all the time. But for me, if I check back on my notes, usually if I do it a few times in that week, I'll have it memorized in my head and I don't really have to reference it again.
Are you doing any strength and conditioning or injury prevention?
Yeah, I've always lifted. Actually, before I did jiu-jitsu, I did competitive powerlifting.
Okay.
So that was actually the only thing I did. And then I found jiu-jitsu and I was like, that's super boring. I'm not doing that anymore. But I've always lifted. I have a gym at my house and I kind of just make my own programs, but they're typically based around some kind of periodization and progression of volume. And I stick to a lot of the basics. Squat, bench, deadlift, pull-ups, rows, all of that kind of stuff. And then I'll add in cardio. I used to just bike everywhere for cardio, which is great. So I kind of just try to keep it really simple, but something that I just do consistently year round. And then when I get an injury here and there, I, set up whatever recovery I need to do and muscles I need to work for that. So I think lifting has always been super, super important for my jiu-jitsu.
Could you talk a little bit about periodization and how you might use it to get ready for, obviously if a small competition comes along, you're not going to taper for that long. But say the big one, you're going to appear 2023 pans. What are you going to do?
Right. So usually I'll take my old powerlifting programs and there might be like a 12-week block. It depends on what the camp is like. And at the beginning of the training, it'll be more focused on hypertrophy. So like high rep, really just getting my muscles used to getting that stamina that they need. And then as the weeks progress, the weight will get lower and I'll get heavier. And I'll just go from there to build strength. And then a few weeks before the tournament, I'll start tapering things back down to give my body time to adjust and recover. So basically, I'm just doing a big hill of like high rep, low weight, all the way up to low rep, high weight, all the way up to deloading. So pretty typical what you would see in a powerlifting program. You just have to give yourself a little bit more leeway as far as jiu-jitsu. Like, for example, I'm not going to overload my CNS by doing super heavy deadlifts all the time. I'm going to do a little bit, things that are a little bit easier when you have to go fight every day and you don't want your back to literally be like broken and your nervous system to be shot. So I moderate it, but generally it's still going to be a powerlifting program.
What do you do both for training and for lifting in the final week before a big competition? I assume that you're obviously talking about tapering, but what does that look like specifically?
So I definitely, coming a week up to the tournament, I would probably have my last lift on maybe that weekend. It depends on the tournament. But at least a week before, I'm probably going to stop lifting and I'm going to focus more on, just going to class and doing positional and stuff like that, but keeping it more chill. So I'll have a couple intense sessions earlier in the week. If I'm competing on Saturday, I'll probably train normally through Monday and maybe Tuesday, I'll keep it pretty normal. And Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is going to be super light. So I'll go in and I'll move and I'll work on stuff, but I'm not going to be sparring super hard. I'm going to let my body take those days to actually recover. And then, I usually take 1 to 2 days off before. It just depends on how much rest I feel like I need and like where I'm at mentally.
Have you overtrained in the past?
Oh yeah, for sure. I like when I was in that phase of like, okay, I just have to train 3 times a day, super hard all the time. That's how you get better. I would kind of try to like roll all the way up until the tournament. And I didn't realize how crucial like 2 full days of rest could be for your body. Like we're so used to being tired that you don't realize how much you can actually recover in those last couple of days before a competition.
I think the overtraining thing is epidemic in the sport, and it used to be worse. And I mean, if you're really severely overtrained, a week isn't enough to recover because for one, you're going to be sick, you're going to be injured, and you're just going to be hormonally cooked as well.
Oh yeah, I know when I was getting overtrained in the past is like I would feel it emotionally. I would just be like hating everything I was doing. Like I wouldn't even want to go to training, which is so weird for me, like, because it's always the favorite part of my day. And so, yeah, I would feel it mentally. And I was like, okay, like, we can't do this whole, like, you have to grind. And you can't you can't rest. You have to rest. You can't progress unless you're actually allowing your body and mind to rest. And that is honestly, I think, one of the hardest things for most athletes to learn is how to properly recover and rest.
Do you do anything else for recovery other than not training?
Yeah, I mean, I get like massages and body work. I try to do ice baths when I can. Sauna is always great. So I try to do those things, especially leading up to a big competition. I think the main thing is I sleep super well. I think that's honestly my biggest key to recovery is just always getting proper sleep. I think that will help me recover more than anything.
How much sleep do you get?
At least 8 hours. Okay. I would get 9 if I could, but like a good 8 hours where I have good sleep hygiene before and I'm not on my phone and I'm having regular sleep schedules and my room is the proper temperature and it's dark and all those types of things that they tell you to increase your sleep. I try to do those because I think without sleep, like any other recovery you're doing is like, it's just not even as good. It's not going to be as effective.
It's amazing how many people say, oh, I've just always been a shitty sleeper. Always. Yeah, well, what about all these things? Nah, I wouldn't. And then if they actually try it, like, I'm actually sleeping way better. Weird.
It's like break down your entire, how you go to sleep. Break down the 2 hours after, like before you go to sleep. How are you actually sleeping? What is your room like? What do you do? Like, there's so many factors that you have to address before you can just be like, well, I'm a bad sleeper.
When's the last time you had caffeine? I mean, that's got a 6-hour half-life, I think. So
exactly. The caffeine usage is actually a huge problem with athletes, I think. I think there's a ton of caffeine dependence with athletes, which I think is really bad hormonally and bad for your sleep schedule, which is bad for your brain. So it's just, I think that's a huge problem as well.
Do you mostly train in the mornings or in the evenings?
I prefer to train in the mornings, depending on what my schedule with school and work permits, but I try to always train in the morning. There's a couple of days where I have to train just at night, but typically training in the morning is my favorite.
Yeah. I think it's pretty hard to come down from, for some people, myself included, to come down from a training high or just a training state of arousal and then try to transition into bed. It's better now than it used to be. I remember when the first UFCs came out, I would actually cycle to the bar showing the UFC back in the old days.
Yeah.
And I'd actually have sleeping pills in my pocket. And at the final fight, I'd have to pop the sleeping pills because if I came home, oh my God, he should have been doing this. He could have been doing that.
Yeah.
It was so visceral and it was so new that, forget trying to sleep for
I definitely
4
had
hours
that
after
problem in the beginning. Yeah. I remember I used to come home and I would just be wired for like ever because I was like so excited and hyped up from the training. And now I don't really have that problem. Like I might have to wind down a little bit, but I think my body is kind of used to it by now.
Yeah. So you're in university. What are you studying?
Mm-hmm. I'm studying clinical psychology at UCSD.
Okay. And what drew you to that?
I've always been, well, my parents are both in science. They're both scientists. So I've always been a very curious person because of that. And I always had kind of an affinity for just like learning about people. And I was always very observant. So it kind of felt like a natural thing to go into. But actually, when I started jiu-jitsu was really the time when I wanted to go into psychology. Not only just was I getting interested in sports psychology, but I was just meeting all these people who went into jiu-jitsu for various reasons. And a lot of the reasons were mental health reasons. So that kind of spurred something in me where I wanted to explore that realm more and see if I could do something that could combine both of the things.
Okay. So are you hoping to get into clinical psychology, research psychology? It's such a big field.
It's a huge field. Right now I'm planning to be more in the clinical aspect of it because I love working with people. And I feel like, I grew up around parents who are in the research side of things. And as fascinating as I find it, it's like, for me, such a limiting environment when you come from jiu-jitsu, which is just like this amazing thing that you can go do. And for me to just sit in a lab all day and have to deal with the bureaucracy of like science, because it is there's a lot of gatekeeping in science. I think it just kind of like put me off of it. And I would rather just work individually with people and actually see the changes that I'm making.
What do you mean I can't randomize a couple of groups and make half of them do no-gi jiu-jitsu and make half of them do gi jiu-jitsu, whether they like it or not, and see if it helps them?
Oh, God, yeah. That's funny. I'm actually interning at a lab, though, right now. So I'm getting to see, like, the business side of science, and I'm like, I just want to go train and then help people. Like, I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a little bit of research and worked as a researcher. It's an entirely different world, and these people are forever chasing funding, and it's
like even if you find your passion, it's like there's all these barriers for you to actually get to study that because there's just so much gatekeeping.
Yeah, and some of those barriers are understandable. I mean, you don't want some mad scientist, I don't know, vivisecting live students to figure something out. I mean, you do need ethics committees and whatnot. But when you're being held back by that, like, damn it, don't they just understand how important it is what I want to do? No, they need to check everybody.
Yeah.
So how do you...
And I've just heard... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you first.
I've heard a lot of burnout in the people who I've worked with. And so I think that being able to do something that's more applicable where I'm working with people is just what's really going to make me happy, because jiu-jitsu has just taught me that I love to interact with people, so...
All right, so I'm sure you get this question a lot. How do you balance essentially full-time athletic training with full-time university studying?
Yeah, I get this question all the time.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not easy. Like, it's definitely not easy. I don't want to be like, oh yeah, it's super easy for me and blah, blah, blah. But I would say that, honestly, I was homeschooled for part of my high school, and it really, really taught me how to schedule. And so I'm very, very organized, and I have a very specific weekly schedule, and I'm just on top of everything I need to be doing and like in that type of way. And my parents taught me how to be like that because they're in science and So I really took those examples and just learned how to be extremely organized. And that's probably the only thing that's really gotten me through it, because I have so much going on all the time that I basically live off of just like schedules and planners and all of that kind of thing. But honestly, the other part is like, you have to have the energy to do all this stuff, right? Like you can have a schedule and that's fine, but it's exhausting. So I sleep super well and I love everything that I do. And I practice a lot of gratitude. Even when I'm at school, like doing classes that I don't necessarily want to be doing, I'm very grateful for everything that I'm able to do. And that gives me a lot of pleasure and happiness for what I'm doing. And so I have that energy to actually go about these super long days because I'm not viewing it from a really negative standpoint.
I imagine that'd be important if you were working a job that you hated as opposed to studying something that you love. That would be really hard.
Yeah, and I was working for a while, just various jobs like in like a coffee shop and things like that. And I did notice, like, because it wasn't something I was so passionate about, my energy levels were just so much lower. But I'm actually way busier now, but I'm way happier. So
give me an example of the scheduling that you have to do. Like, what was today's schedule?
And today's schedule was, I woke up and I got everything ready and like packed all my food and everything like that. Did all my things that I needed to do in the morning, journaling, reading, whatever. And then I trained class in the morning, and then I stayed after for about an hour or two to do extra positional and drilling. So I kind of combined all my training for the day into like a 3 to 4 hour block. And then I went to my internship until 6 p.m. and then I came home and then I hopped on with you. So typically it'll be something like I leave the house in the morning, I train, I go to school, I might train again, and then I come home and I study. So it's pretty much just go, go, go.
So how on earth do you have time to run a business then on top of that?
Weekends.
Yeah.
No, but I do, I just find time for everything. Like the business, it's easy for me when I have multiple things going on because I feel like my brain is able to switch and it's not like I'm doing the same thing all day. Like if I had to do 12 hours of just school or just work, it would be so much harder. But since I have all these different avenues, some of them are creative, some of them are more for school, like my brain can actually switch to each one. But typically on weekends, that's the times where I'll really spend time on my business or other things that I want to do. And yeah, I'll just use that free time to work on something that is important to me.
Yeah. I suppose, so how much time a day do you spend on social media?
Not that much. Like I try to keep it to a minimum. I just don't have time to. So maybe like an hour, which is a lot. I used to be really addicted to my phone though, so I did have to break that habit. That was actually a problem for a while. It wastes so much time. So once I cut that out, I had so much more time. I don't even honestly watch TV at night anymore because I'm pretty much just doing something until I go to sleep. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get off my phone before I go to bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, a great to the people who say, I have no time, and then they take a look at their time tracker on their phone, they do have time. And I'm as guilty as anybody, and I can justify it as, well, this is part of my business, but it's always easy to find a justification.
Yeah.
And then you
even
end up
TV, like people just zone out. They just watch like 5 episodes of something. They don't even realize it.
Yeah. So what are you training for now?
So right now I have a little competition coming up this weekend. That's like a team competition for Midwest finishers. And then I have my first seminar that weekend, which is pretty fun.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And then I have a big match on Who's Number One, February 25th. So I have a match with Jasmine Rocha, which is super exciting for me because we fought at ADCC Trials and I lost and it was really close. So I'm super excited for that match. And then I have a couple opens, and then I'm actually doing Combat Jiu-jitsu on Medusa in March. Yeah.
With the slapping?
Yeah, with the slapping.
So what's your favorite rule set then?
I love ADCC rules. I love sub only or ADCC rules. So anything that's like not points based is my favorite because I just love submissions. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It does really seem that that's always what you're going for.
Yeah.
And it makes for a very exciting style of jiu-jitsu to watch.
Thank you.
But have you done any EBI?
Not really. The competition I'm doing this weekend has EBI overtime, and it's actually my first time doing EBI overtime in a competition. So hopefully I'll get to try that out.
So the starting in an armbar, starting in
so I've been training it a lot. Yeah, it's a very hard rule set to train for. Honestly, it's very difficult, and I've watched a lot of footage on it, and it does seem to cause a lot of upsets because they're just very odd positions to be started in. So it's definitely something you have to train a lot for. Yeah.
I wonder if they could have 30 different positions. They draw them from a hat. That
actually seems fun. I like the overtime rules where it's like, I like the ADCC rules where no one can pull guard and it's like that. Or maybe even first point, so you could pull maybe, but the first point is the end of the match.
How's your wrestling nowadays?
A lot better. I've actually focused a lot on my wrestling since getting to Autos. That's something that I didn't really have when I first got there. And a lot of the people I train with are really great wrestlers. So that's a huge part of my game that I've really focused on developing. I try to train wrestling at least once a week. I'll go to a wrestling class where we're just doing just wrestling. So definitely something that I want to continue to add because it's really important for ADCC, which is like my ultimate goal.
And when you're training wrestling in isolation, how are you dealing with the awareness of submissions? I mean, most classically, it'd be awareness of guillotines or awareness of head and arms, which are a lot more dangerous in submission grappling than they are in classical. Is it in classical wrestling?
Yeah.
Is it pure wrestling that you're doing or wrestling
So I go to a class with Justin Flores. So JFlow, like on Instagram, he is a great wrestling coach, but all of the classes it's like wrestling and jiu-jitsu combined. So we're training, it's all jiu-jitsu people training or MMA people training. And so most of the wrestling is based off of grappling sports and it's not just pure wrestling. So it's built in that you have that awareness of like submissions and things like that. Because going to just a straight wrestling class would probably be, you'd have to definitely think about those moments where jiu-jitsu would come into play. It's hard to find those, even though it's very hard to get wrestling training, in my opinion.
I imagine most of it would be through the universities.
Yeah, I guess that would be true. We don't really have like wrestling at the school I go to, but okay. I've honestly wanted to go. I know there's some like high school wrestling camps that allow people to come, and I would love to go to a high school wrestling camp. Seriously, I think it would be great.
Destroy the egos of all the teenage boys. Awesome.
No, I think they would destroy my ego. Yeah. I think I would go in there thinking I was good, and then 13-year-old boys would just be like firemen carrying me.
Yeah. Well, I would talk about a throw that you don't see a lot in submission grappling. That's a mainstay for wrestling.
Yeah, exactly.
How to throw yourself into a crucifix.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love when people try to fireman's carry because crucifix is like one of my favorite positions.
Please. My day job is a firefighter. I'm deeply offended by the use of firemen.
I'm sorry.
No. Okay. Well, now we got that sorted out. So how do you, more classically, how do you deal with the guillotine threat for double legs and the Kimura threat for single legs?
Yeah, I think that I don't go for doubles as much. I find that it's a lot easier for me to play more outside wrestling and pick up singles and stuff like that. And with the singles, if I feel the threat of the Kimura or anything like that, I'm always going to the back. I think a lot of people at Autos also wrestle like that, where they're very willing to go to the back, because I feel like anytime you're on the back, it just mitigates a lot of those defenses that people might have. It's a lot easier to finish without as much risk when you're on the back. So I think having that
going to the other person's back.
Yeah, right. Like body lock, but from the back. Right. I think that's a lot safer. So anytime I'm feeling threatened, I'm just focusing on, okay, how can I just get to the back? Because that's a lot safer for me than being in front of them where they can go for Kimuras or guillotines and stuff like that. But a lot of the, I think, submissions that come from wrestling takedowns and jiu-jitsu are from, not following through. I think when a lot of jiu-jitsu people first start to learn how to wrestle, there's a huge amount of hesitation because it's hard to really just wrestlers are very explosive. They enter the positions and they just drive through 100%. And jiu-jitsu people are a little more flowy and they don't like to fully commit to things like that, I think. So something I definitely worked on was just being a lot more aggressive and finishing without hesitation. So that helped a lot.
How did you train that? Because I totally agree. That's a common problem when jiu-jitsu people who are flowing with a go get into wrestling or even judo. They think that there's some kind of technical way to do, I don't know, an osoto or a double leg or whatever, but really, and there are technical aspects to it, but really it's just hitting the other person really bloody hard to fold them in half and or really pulling them and really kicking their leg. I think that's I think you hit the nail on the head. That's a kind of an antithetical to how a lot of people do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you watch people first start to learn wrestling and jiu-jitsu, we're seeing a single leg. We're like, I want to go for it, but I don't want to commit. And then in that middle ground is where you get in trouble. So I tried to just, mentally, I had to talk to myself. And during training, I'm gonna be like, we're gonna shoot and we're gonna shoot as hard as you can. And if you get guillotined, that's fine because it's training. And so I just had to train myself to kind of just go for it and not hesitate, because every time I hesitated, I got choked. So I was like, hey, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you shoot full? You're going to get choked, which is what's already happening. So it was more of a just like sit down and analyze what's going wrong and just put more effort in those positions. And drilling a lot of wrestling helps, right? Like drilling actual proper head position, spine position, posture, all of those things help a lot.
Do or do not, Amanda-san. There is no try.
Exactly.
So what got you gave you the idea to start a training clothing line, the Kimono Boutique? So, I really wanted to, there's so many gear businesses and they're all run by men, which is fine because it's a male-dominated sport. But I really just wanted to do something where, I could make a business that's run by women, that makes things that are just for women, because we're really, really trying to like put our foot in the door and progress in this sport, and things are starting to ramp up a little bit. So I just felt like we needed some more representation. And also, like, I just hated a lot of the things I was wearing. And I was like, why don't I just start to design things that I like? I want my gi to fit this way, so I'm going to make it fit this way. And it just, a lot of my friends were really supportive. And I was just like, yeah, let's do this, because women really do need a bigger variety of things to wear. Like, usually the women's gear is like a very specific style, or it's made by a company that doesn't specialize in it and it still fits kind of weird. So I really just wanted to make something that was for us. And how long has that been going now?
About a year-ish, maybe a little bit more, from the initial startup. And now this year I'm working on releasing like probably around 5 new products, and, it's starting to pick up. So I'm really excited.
That's awesome. In terms of women in the sport, there's obviously been a huge uptick in the last 5 to 10 years. And I was proven wrong another time. I used to have a theory that if women came into the sport, it would mostly be in the gi, just because of the additional sort of layers of separation between the bodies.
Interesting, yeah.
But I was, again, as more data came in, I was totally wrong. And no gi is proving to be really popular. Why do you think that is? Why was I wrong?
Well, one, I don't think you're fully wrong, actually, because when I first started, that was the exact reason that I liked the gi more. I hated no gi when I first started because I felt very vulnerable training with only guys, never having had that kind of contact. So I felt like the gi was, a barrier between me and the guys. So I do definitely agree. I think the difference now is that there are more women to kind of be a leader and to help new women coming in and to kind of ease that bridge and that gap between, hey, like, you don't have to be so nervous. Like, there's a community here for you. There's women here for you. So they have a little bit more comfortability right off the bat of like going into either or. Personally, I do see at Atos, a lot of the new girls who start are still kind of on that gi side and are more focused on that. So I think in a way, the gi can be a stepping stone for women to get into jiu-jitsu. And then once they get comfortable, then they realize that, like, no gi is way more fun.
Why is no gi more fun?
I'm just kidding. To me, it's more fun because it feels so much more like, it's so much quicker, and there's so many scrambles, and scrambles are like my favorite part. It feels more physical to me. and I don't have to think as much of like very specific gi grips. I can just kind of be more of a physical athlete, which I just really enjoy. But gi is great. I just prefer no gi.
Well, maybe there's a reason you were a power lifter, and
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people get into powerlifting who are actually super intellectual in their day jobs. And I know a ton of engineers who are powerlifters.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just a sheer physicality of, lift up heavy thing.
Yeah.
And then just with the ability to nerd out to infinite detail about, oh no, I've put, 10 pounds too many on my left toe as opposed to my left heel.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how very intellectual people sometimes like the more physical expression.
Yeah. It's very true, actually. I've also found that to be very true. And often I feel like they're the people who end up really, really good. Like you'll have the really jacked nerds because they put everything down to a science and they really analyze everything and they make plans for everything. I think jiu-jitsu is an inherently intellectual sport. I mean, I think it's just I've never seen a sport that's so complex. So it really immediately I was drawn to it just from an intellectual standpoint. I was like, there's so many things going on here.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly true. How has your training in psychology affected how you train jiu-jitsu or how you compete in jiu-jitsu? Those are two different questions, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's taught me a lot. When I first started training, I started training because I had anxiety. That was the reason I started training. And jiu-jitsu taught me, it got me off on starting to learn about psychology because I was starting to be aware of how your body could affect your mind and vice versa. And jiu-jitsu was a great way for me to regulate my emotions. And so once I started learning about psychology, it helped me have the tools that I could then implement back into my jiu-jitsu. For example, we've learned a lot about mindfulness and, even cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all about challenging your own thoughts. And it's just a lot of work on how to change your thoughts in order to change your behavior and, achieve desired outcomes or behaviors. So a lot of the classical psychology teachings are things that are very easily applicable to sports and mindset shifts and things like that. Even the lab I work in right now treats anxiety and depression just purely through positive psychology. So purely through mindfulness and meditation and self-awareness in these things. And those all carry over really well to jiu-jitsu. So I went from literally not being able to compete at all to eventually being pretty comfortable going out on the big stages, kind of just using all the tools I was learning in school.
So give me an example of a specific tool that allowed you to go from presumably feeling a fair amount of anxiety around life jiu-jitsu, and so probably, I'm guessing, competition.
Oh my God, yeah.
To being reasonably comfortable. Probably you don't want to get too comfortable, but...
I'm not, don't worry. But I would say the biggest tool for me was visualization. And I think when a lot of people hear visualization, they don't really know what it entails or what does that mean? Are you just really going to just sit there and just think about you winning the match? But for me, it was kind of a series of, sitting down and visualizing multiple different aspects, from getting to the tournament to being in really bad positions during a match to, doing things and having a comeback in a match, and pretty much every scenario that could possibly happen. And when I was visualizing those scenarios, I would feel that intense anxiety in my body, and I would let it sit there and I would just feel it. And then I would say okay, we're done feeling this now, we're going to move on. And so I basically trained myself to overcome those intense, actually emotional and physical anxieties by just doing it over and over every day, letting myself feel anxious and then moving on with my day. So that by the time I get to the tournament and I feel that, I know how to shut it off in myself and I know how to go about what I need to do. So it's kind of just a bunch of exposure therapy to all of the catastrophic thinking that anxious people tend to have, and just doing that over and over until you're not scared of the emotion anymore.
Can you give me an example of a visualization you might have done once or twice or 10 times?
Yeah.
What kind of bad scenario would you have started with?
I was visualizing, this is funny, like I went against a girl at PANS who had beat me in the open class before, and I had been mounted by her for like 6 minutes and I never got out and I lost. So leading up to that match, I was visualizing myself in bottom mount and like how I was going to make a comeback and how I was going to get out. And that exact thing happened. I got mounted. I was like down by like 8 points or something. And then I was like, oh, I've thought about this a lot. I know that I still have time and I can handle these emotions. And I ended up getting out and like getting a submission. So because I was so prepared to feel that like, oh no, I'm in bottom mount feeling, it didn't really bother me that much. And I was able to still use my higher self, like my actual brain, to think of what I needed to do instead of just being like, oh my God, like I'm in bottom mount.
Well, let's drill down on this just a little bit more. So in your visualization, were you just visualizing the pressure and the position and the feelings, or specifically, I am going to do an elbow knee escape on the left side? Like, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I think with visualizations for me, the more detailed they are, the more effective they are. So I'll think of everything from, so for example, for that scenario, I would imagine myself in bottom mount. I would imagine how I would be feeling during that time. I would imagine the pressure that's being put on me. And then I would think of like maybe one escape that I wanted to do. And I would think of doing it step by step with the resistance. It's not going to go perfect. It's going to be grindy. I'm going to try to feel those feelings of like having to work really hard to get out of it, feeling all that intense emotion, and then getting out and then moving on with the match. And then I would probably sit and try to visualize the rest of the match. And I would do that, multiple times through the weeks and stuff like that. And so I think the more specific you get with it, the better. I think, like, for example, if you're visualizing, going to the tournament, you should visualize every single thing, like what you're going to eat and like how you feel when you're in the car. How do you feel when you're pulling up to the venue? Who do you see when you get out of the car? Like, what do you do when you first walk in the building? I think building these very vivid mental imagery situations, it really prepares you once you're there.
So you're definitely not the first person to say this, but the naysayers, I'm just going to channel what they're going to say. Yeah, great, cool, Amanda. That's awesome. What if I visualize, I don't know, going to the tournament and seeing these people and standing in line, and then there's no lineup when I get there and I don't see those people and something else happens? Doesn't that throw me off? Or alternately, if I'm visualizing being in the bottom of mount and I can't escape using the thing that I visualized, isn't that going to screw me up? Is there a negative side to visualization?
I think that there's not really a negative side, because say you don't get out of bottom mount, I think you had a much better chance of getting out of bottom mount when you were comfortable and had that visualization tool with you. I think, sometimes things just aren't going to go your way, but I don't think it was because you didn't get out in the way you thought you were going to get out. And also, you can visualize many, many different scenarios and have yourself prepared for a ton of different things. You don't have to visualize the same thing over and over and only visualize that thing. I think if you feel the need to visualize all the different scenarios that could happen, then you can do that. But I don't like to hyper focus on like, well, what if that doesn't go right? That becomes its own like thing that you get down and you're like, well, what if I'm visualizing the wrong thing? So I try to detach from those negative feelings and just realize I'm just using it as a tool to prepare my mind for any kind of negative feelings that come up, any type of hard thing that I'm about to do. It's more just about building that overall like control over your thoughts, I think, is the most important part of it.
Okay. So I guess the final question that I have for you is, given that it's not that long ago that you weren't doing jiu-jitsu and now you are doing a ton of jiu-jitsu at a very high level, what would be your advice to people in general thinking about starting? And if that advice is different for women, please feel free to share that as well.
Yeah. The advice I would have for women definitely is that they have a place in every gym. And I think that women need to use their voice when they first start training. I think there's sometimes a lot of anxiety that comes with being a woman in the gym because you feel maybe pressured to roll with everyone and train with everyone. And I think that a lot of women should realize that, you are there for you. You don't have to train with anyone you don't want to train with. You can be very specific who you want to train with. No one is pressuring you to do anything. and to really just be, using your voice. For example, I used to try to roll with every single big guy, and it scared me and I got hurt a lot. And then I started saying like, no, I'm not going to roll with you. And I got better. I got hurt less. So I think speaking up in those situations is really important for women. And then just in general, I would say,
and if your club doesn't support that, no, you're a white belt.
You got to go. You got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like I think that it's super, super important to not be pushed. I don't agree with like the, well, no, you have to roll with everyone. I'm gone then. Like I'm not here to be the person that everyone's allowed to roll with just, because you think that's how it should be. I'm here for myself, and I need to have those boundaries. I think you have to maintain boundaries even though you're in a jiu-jitsu school and there's customs, but boundaries are still important no matter what.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, as a bigger guy, it's not as much of an issue for me.
Yeah.
But I have specific injuries in my body from 20 years ago where it's like, fuck, I probably shouldn't roll with this guy, but it's expected. And, the whole, hey, let's just go light, except when, I get into a great position for a neck crank and Karak, I should have stuck with my guns. So I will second, third, and I don't know, fourth, what you just said there.
Absolutely. It's very important.
If you don't feel comfortable training with somebody, don't do it. Maybe a year from now you'll feel different, but if you don't feel comfortable now, don't do it, and leave if the school's trying to force you to do it.
Absolutely. I think that would be the main advice for anyone. I mean, you can say that to guys even. Like if there's someone who, you think is too aggressive or is going to hurt you in some situation, like you don't have to roll with them. Like just remind yourself that you're there for you. And at the end of the day, you're the one who has to go home and deal with the injuries that might happen. So, you got to take care of yourself.
Okay. How do people keep up with what you're doing? You're doing so many things. So point us in some interesting directions.
Like to follow me, my Instagram is a good place. I post a lot on there. It's just amandabruse.bjj. And then, that's pretty much the place I'm active right now. My website for my business is Kimono Boutique. So the website is www.thekimono-boutique.com. So those are two great places to keep up on everything.
And you're also beginning to teach some seminars now?
Yeah, so I have my first seminar in Chicago next weekend, which is really exciting. And I'm looking to set up some more this year. Teaching is actually one of my favorite things to do. I've taught a lot of classes. I teach a lot of lessons. So seminars are definitely something that I want to get on this year.
Awesome. Well, good luck this weekend, and good luck later in February, and then good luck later in March, and then good luck later in April.
Yeah.
And
Thank you so
good luck
much
with your degree as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.